In this video, we will be replacing the front brake caliper in this 2012 Ford F150. After driving the vehicle with a caliper piston failure, there was smoke coming from the passenger side wheel. Upon closer inspection, we can see where the heat has caused the wheel skin to melt. So we will be progressing through the process to replace the caliper and inspect the additional components. To prep this repair, I have installed wheel chocks behind the rear tires. I have set the parking brake. I have raised the vehicle off of the ground and used a safety stand to support the side of the vehicle that we will be working on. Taking a look behind our wheel, we can clearly see our rotor. We can also see our caliper. Inside the caliper we have our brake pads, and that caliper is mounted to a caliper mounting bracket which runs around the rotor. We are going to focus the majority of our attention on the caliper, which is ultimately the component that had failed. If we take a look at the back side of our wheel assembly, we can also see where that caliper is positioned in relation to all of the other components. We want to locate our two caliper mounting bolts, one on top and one towards the bottom. We also want to locate the bleeder screw as well as our brake line that is going into the caliper. I'm going to begin by applying some Amsoil metal protector to both of the caliper bolts, as this will act as a penetrating oil and help me remove them much easier. And I'm also going to lubricate that bleeder screw. And lastly, we will lubricate that brake line going into the caliper. After that Amsoil metal protector has soaked in, I'm going to install the back shank of a 1/8 inch drill bit into the bleeder screw hole. This will help prevent the bleeder screw from collapsing or breaking off as I try to loosen it. And then using the closed end of a 3/8 inch combination wrench and a rubber mallet, I can gently apply some pressure to loosen this bleeder screw. And once that's loose, we can tighten it back up for right now. We also want to loosen the location that the brake line goes into the caliper. I found that a 12mm wrench fits best, and I will be also using a rubber mallet to gently work that free. The purpose in doing this is to make sure that we can remove these easily when the caliper is off of the wheel assembly. We can then shift our attention to our two caliper bolts. Although I believe this is a 13mm bolt, my 1/2 inch wrench fits on it a little bit better. And again, I'm gently using a rubber mallet to help loosen these bolts. And then we can remove both of those caliper bolts by hand. Once our caliper bolts have been removed, we can use a large standard head screwdriver to gently work the caliper off of the pads. Now, if that piston is still seized, this may prove to be a difficult task. And after having removed the caliper, I will be supporting it with a bungee cord underneath the vehicle to make sure that we are not putting unnecessary strain on the brake line. So currently, the only thing holding my caliper onto the vehicle aside from the bungee cords, is the one bolt connecting the brake line to the caliper. If I remove this bolt, I can remove that brake line, but then brake fluid will be flowing out of that brake line. So prior to removing this brake line, I'm going to unwrap my new brake caliper and make sure that it is prepped and ready to install, so I can make a quick transition from the old caliper to the new caliper. A couple things to note on our new caliper. We have our 2 caliper bolts, which are attached to our caliper mounting bracket. We have our bleed screw location, and we also have our input port for our brake line. Our new caliper also came with brake hardware as well as a couple brass washers. Our brake caliper bolts also came with the guides as well as new boots. So we will not need to purchase new ones of those. And the 2 caliper pistons are already seated as far back as they go. So this unit should be ready for installation. Shifting our focus back to the vehicle, we can remove the existing brake pads. And we are then left with our brake caliper mounting bracket. And taking a look again on the back side of our wheel assembly, we can see that brake caliper mounting bracket. We can also see that there are 2 mounting bracket bolts, which are what connects it to the vehicle. We'll put a generous coating of Amsoil metal protector on each of these bolts to aid in the removal process. I believe these bolts are 21 millimeter. However, I will be using a 13/16 as it just fits a little bit better. And you will want to hang on to that bracket as you remove the second bolt, just so it doesn't fall. I always like to compare my old unit with my new unit just to do a visual check and make sure that things are going to line up. Our new unit did not come with the caliper bracket mounting bolts. We could clean these up if they're in good condition and apply just a little bit of thread locker. However, I went ahead and purchased new bolts since we are replacing all of the components anyways. I'm also going to remove the rotor so I can inspect it as well as the brake pads. If I inspect the rotor, I can see that the rotor does feel nice and smooth still. There are no deep scores into the rotor. The backside also does not have any deep scores or damage that is apparent. If I take a look at the brake pads, those also seem to be in good condition still. And based on my assessment, it is possible that we could possibly reuse the rotor and same pads if they are in good condition. I would be a little concerned that the rotor may have warped due to the excessive heat, and you may want to have that rotor turned at your auto parts store. But other than that, these components are still in good condition. However, for the purpose of this video, I am going to fully replace the rotors and pads. Typically, if your caliper did fail, you would probably have additional damage to other components. I happened to catch this the day that it occurred, so the severity of the damage was very minimal. Prior to installation of the new components, I do want to clean the existing hub. I will be using Amsoil brake and parts cleaner along with a wire brush to help clean off any of the corrosion or rust that has built up over the years. And when that dries, I will be applying some Amsoil heavy duty metal protector, which acts as an undercoat and does not attract dust. This will help prevent future rust and corrosion, or at least minimize the occurrence thereof. Additionally, this will aid in the removal of the wheel at any point in the future. With my new rotors, I am first going to clean the surface with Amsoil brake and parts cleaner. This will remove any of the oil that is coated on the rotors in the manufacturing and shipping process. And I'm going to install one lug nut at the bottom to help hold this in place. I'm going to go ahead and add my new caliper and bracket to the vehicle. If you remember, I have not yet disconnected that brake line from the old caliper yet. The caliper mounting bracket bolts will then be torqued to 184 foot-pounds. And then we can remove those two 14mm caliper bolts. So at this point, I'm going to disconnect my bolt that is holding my brake line into my old caliper. We will pull that bolt out, pull the old caliper off, and install the new caliper. This will minimize the amount of fluid loss during this transition. And just to reduce the amount of brake fluid that will drip onto our new brake components, I'm going to install a flexible funnel, essentially as a cover, just to shed some of that brake fluid. And we can then loosen that bolt. On my old unit, I do have a brass washer that is tight up against the mating surface. And on my brake line fitting, I also have a brass washer that needs to be replaced. And we will torque that down to 26 foot-pounds once it is installed back on the vehicle. So at this point, we are looking pretty good. We're going to focus our attention back to the caliper mounting bracket where we will install our brake parts hardware. I'm going to apply just a little bit of brake parts lubricant to the surfaces where we have metal on metal contact. This will help prevent future rust or corrosion, as well as possibly prevent any type of squeaking that may occur. And then I can install my brake hardware. Now with this brake hardware, we have a larger clip and a smaller clip. The smaller clip goes towards the rotor. And we want to put the smaller clip on first and then roll your finger to push down on the larger clip. And there are 4 of these components, 1 in each location where the brake pads will be held. Taking a look at our new pads, we can see that one of the pads does have 2 protrusions on the outer edge. This pad is the pad that goes towards the inside of the vehicle. And we can slide our pads into place. After those pads, we can then add the caliper. Followed by the caliper mounting bolts. And our caliper mounting bolts can then be tightened to 27 foot-pounds. And this is tightened with a 14mm socket on a torque wrench. And our brake line bolt is a 12mm. Our next stage is to bleed the brakes. I will be first opening the bleeder screw just to make sure that it is not stuck. Again, I will be using a drill bit. However, this time it is just a little bit smaller diameter. And we'll go ahead and loosen that bleeder screw and then tighten it back up just to make sure that we can get that open and closed. And to bleed those brakes, I'm going to be using a brake bleed tool to help with this process. First with my 3/8 inch wrench. Next with the bleed tool. And then we can reinstall that dust boot. And then we can give it one more shot of Amsoil brake and parts cleaner before we reinstall the wheel. And then those wheel lug nuts need to be torqued to 150 foot-pounds. Now before driving it, we do want to set the caliper pistons by depressing the brake a couple times until it firms up. And depending on your particular repair, you may need to do the driver's side as well. If you are replacing brake pads, you want to do both sides at the same time. Additionally, you'll want to top off the brake fluid reservoir. And lastly, we can take it for a test drive.